Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Vanessa Zyrakaya, Marketing Manager at SystemSoft Technologies. We are excited to be live today and looking forward to what I believe will be an insightful and engaging episode on ransomware and the critical steps you must take now to ensure your organization isn't the next headline. On behalf of SystemSoft Technologies and Security and Compliance Associates, thank you for taking the time to join us today. We would like to ensure an engaging experience, so please submit your questions at any time by posting them in the comment section. Now, let's introduce today's experts. We have Fani Yalamanchali, Cybersecurity Specialist and Chief Cloud Architect at SystemSoft Technologies. Fani is a security veteran with more than 15 years experience working with Fortune 500 organizations across various industries. Fani advises customers on their cybersecurity strategies and on enhancing their security postures through application security programs, security architecture implementations, and security policy implementations. We also have a special guest, Maya Bovic, Chief Information Security Officer at Security Compliance Associates. Maya has over 15 years of experience in the information security, compliance, and corporate governance space. She has advised multi-billion-dollar financial institutions, state government agencies, large healthcare operations, and many other organizations where cybersecurity is a mission-critical part of their infrastructure. Maya currently oversees a team of Infosec consultants and advisors that perform cybersecurity audits and advisory services for companies seeking to improve their cybersecurity posture, as well as conform to compliancy regulations and other mandates. Welcome, Fani and Maya. We look forward to engaging with you today on insights and experiences. So let's get started.
Hello, everyone. I think good morning, everyone. And I would like to start by beginning with kind of explaining what were the primary reasons that we noticed were kind of the reasons behind the rise in the cybersecurity attacks, data breaches, or ransomware. I would like to bring up two critical points. The first one was pertaining to the rise of remote work, and the second one was the focus on the rise of popularity on cryptocurrencies and the anonymity of the payments behind them. What we have noticed in the last year due to pandemic was that organizations were suddenly forced to support remote work. And we noticed two different sets of organizations. The first set of organizations were the organizations who already have a remote work policy, infrastructure, and support for some level to begin with before the pandemic. And what they had to do is they had to scale it up to kind of support the access to remote work across their enterprise or organization. And from what we have noticed, so those organizations overall seem to fare well in kind of making sure there are proper security gates and controls, and we're doing good. But the other organizations where they don't have a proper setup for remote access and remote work were the organizations, due to the short amount of time they had to adopt to support this, they were forced to take some security risks or gaps, which were one of the critical things that we think was the rise of this increase in ransomware attacks, etc. Um, and a tangential thing to that is now that with the rise of remote work, most of the employees are using personal devices like laptops and mobile devices to access their enterprise networks. And obviously, these machines or desktops are not protected by the typical standard endpoint antivirus malware protections by default. So that was a major contributing factor that what we observed as part of our interactions with our client, etc. And also, the other one was we are also noticing that the rise of popularity in cryptocurrencies and also the anonymity of those payments, right? So this was one of the second primary reason that we have noticed. And if you put yourself in shoes of a hacker or a cyber criminal, they look for gaps, right? Exploit those gaps and try to get benefit out of it. So these were the two critical things that exactly map with each other, and that was causing the rise in these attacks from what we have noticed. So yeah, I think Maya, you also spent a lot amount of time in this area helping our clients. So I know you have nice things to add. I would give it to you.
Thank you, Fanny. And those are great points. And that's exactly what we have seen how organizations have shifted the way they're conducting business. And along the same lines, the ransomware tactics have shifted as well from being just a threat of lockdown access to data to a threat of releasing the data, which has forced the organizations to pay more ransom, which actually encourages the malicious actors to execute more attacks on the organizations. There's a very sophisticated cyber mafia out there, and they're out to extort the organizations. Cyber criminals and their techniques are becoming more sophisticated with every day. And if you're not keeping up to speed with the latest trends, chances are high that you might become a new target. So let's just think about this. Does the technical degree from 30 years ago is the technical degree from 30 years ago still relevant today? It's really not. So that being said, let's just think about how new tactics cyber criminals are using. For example, ransomware as a service, a business model that has taken a lot of steam over the past year. Just like software as a service product, it's a subscription-based model available to users that don't even need to be skilled or experienced to use the tool. Ransomware as a service developers create these sophisticated software packages with a high chance of penetration success and a low chance of discovery. It provides the malicious actors with sophisticated and proven tactics to execute the attacks. It's a monthly flat fee subscription with a pure profit sharing, so it's very attractive to malicious actors. So, Fanny, I will hand it over.
Yeah, no, those are very good points, Maya. And I think I would like to just add on to your education part. Uh, so definitely, I think one of the very critical things that you mentioned about is the user awareness and the education side of things, right? And there are now a lot of tools available for enterprises and organizations to support this learning management. And one critical missing piece, what we've kind of noticed is that it's not only important to get new employees trained in the cybersecurity best practices and awareness, but we should also make sure there are recurring meetings and recurring sessions to make sure that the knowledge is on top of their head always, so that this is basically the weakest link in the whole chain, right? So at the end of the day, security is as strong as how your weakest link is positioned on. So that's critical, and thanks for bringing up that, Maya. And there are good tools like Degree, SAP Cloud, and all of the SaaS-based platforms that enterprises can use. And as I mentioned, the critical thing is to make sure they're frequently being followed and properly being monitored across your organization. And yeah, I think one other thing, I think just adding on to some more points about what are the things that as an organization you can do to kind of prevent or kind of efficiently handle some attacks, right? So typically, the challenge would be, and I think most of the cases where we have looked at customers' experiences is about lack of ability to identify the blind spots. So most customers typically end up having the basic checklist like spam filter, emails, files, scanning, network scans, things like that, right? So these are the 101. So, and most customers and clients already have it. But if we notice the way the malicious hackers are coming in and kind of exploiting this, are kind of using the blind spots which are typically missed in the most cases. So what we kind of, I mean, let me give a couple of examples, right? So think about COTS products, right? I mean, your organizations have some custom built code, some COTS products, right? So it's also it's very important to make sure your third-party COTS products and services, um, and kind of make sure they're also secure and properly vetted and kind of in the same security posture that meets your organizational security policy. The second one I would also kind of mention is to identify these blind spots is always good to kind of have a second set of eyes. Either you think of a bug bounty program or third-party assessment or an external vendor come in and do a complete end-to-end architectural review, things like that. We have found good results because, again, there is manual intervention in there, and the second set of eyes always helps you to find these blind spots. And I think one other example that I can think of is in one of our recent experiences, we've had a customer who was having a security check to kind of scan files. But when we were looking at the validity and the integrity of the checks that were in place, we were able to disguise a malicious file as a valid file and still get the system accept that file. So the efficiency of those checks of the security gates in place is also very critical. So that's another example I can think of. And I think moving on, one other common trend or a kind of a industry shift that we have been noticing that's kind of pertaining to back to ransomware is that now that most of the small to mid-level organizations are starting to move to cloud to stay relevant from their on-prem infrastructure. And that step to migrate is very critical because that's the right step to make sure you have the appropriate security controls in place and make sure you invest in the architecture, the implementation of your security policies, the alerting, the monitoring of that is all set up at the get-go before you jump too forward. So that's very critical, and we highly recommend organizations to really invest time, resource, and budget to make sure security is properly embedded. I think one other thing is we can also talk about the zero trust architecture, which has been there for a while, but now it's gaining more traction. It's since about this is more about you trust nothing, right? So previously we used to have a huge subnet that we trust, and now it's more about zero trust, where you have a micro subnets and micro perimeters, where any connectivity outside of this micro perimeter should be vetted and validated with the proper processes in place. So that's another good practices that we recommend customers.
So Fani, we just received a question from the audience. Do you think that zero trust architecture can eliminate insider threats?
That's a very good question. So the answer is yes and no. The reason being, I think, so insider threat by itself is very tricky, right? It's about having an insider actor, which is the hardest part in most cases. The good part is the zero trust policy eliminates the most risk in case of an insider threat. Let's say the micro perimeter, right? So I have component A, I have component B, and even though I want to disrupt component B and I only have access to component A, I can't communicate with this without a proper access control exception, right? So that does reduce the risk, but it does not completely eliminate it.
Thank you.
I hope it.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you, Fani. So, Maya, you too have spent a considerable amount of time in the field assisting and advising clients. For both of you, what are some of the key cybersecurity and resiliency observations that you've made?
Thank you, Vanessa. So the key observations I have working with the organizations of different sizes and complexity can be summed down to a lack of basic security controls. We have seen unsegmented open networks that allow malware to spread. Offline air-gapped backups of data are not maintained. Sensitive data is not air-gapped. Just looking at the Colonial Pipeline breach, we all have asked the question, why was the sensitive data not air gapped? And it might have been to a certain extent, but obviously not enough. So these legacy technologies are present on the networks. Remote support workers, VPN connections in the past year have increased, and they have all opened the doors to potential attackers. I just recently performed an audit for one of the agencies on their mainframe system, and that system was supported by one engineer. He was the only person who administered access. He set up the controls and commands and had any knowledge in the security administration of this legacy system. There was not one person at the agency who could go in and audit this engineer to see if he's following security best practices, to check if the users have too much access, if they're active accounts belonging to users who are no longer employed by the agency. So what do you see here? A single point of failure. And then we ask ourselves a question, but why is this happening? And here's your blind spot. This question has a simple answer. What we see across the board is that organizations are not dedicating enough budget for the security teams and for security solutions or for simple user training.
Excellent points, Maya. We are definitely here a lot on the importance of user education and its significance in helping to prevent attacks, as well as tools organizations can incorporate for security education and awareness as part of the organization's DNA. So, Fani and Maya, why are organizations not dedicating enough budget for the security team?
Well, what am I echoing? Well, everyone knows how important security is and how it should be embedded in everything an organization does, right? Well, wrong. The importance of the information security team is often overlooked, and that is the underlying issue. What we see often in the field are small information security teams supporting many end users, and they have no time or budget to proactively seek and implement solutions to secure the data and network. So when we are hired to perform an audit or an assessment for any type of organization, we present them with the findings and recommendations, and among those items is a very important line item across many organizations, and it typically identifies the need for augmenting the security team, adding a security officer, providing additional training to existing team. Well, this might seem as a straightforward item or recommendation. Typically, it is not until that moment that the executives realize what the underlying issue, and that is the insufficient budget allocated to the security team and a lack of employee and executives training.
Thank you, Maya. So, Fani, do you have any additional observations that you've experienced out in the field with your clients?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for that, Maya and Vanessa. So, I think what we primarily have been telling most of our customers is start with the preventive side of things, right? So it's important to focus on the preventive side of controls. When we start with preventive, we talk about making sure you have appropriate hardening guidelines in place, right? Any component, application, infrastructure related thing as per your business, right? So based on your security policies, procedures, your data that you capture and you own, have the appropriate hardening guidelines for each vertical of your infrastructure, implement them, have a centralized place to monitor and alert you, right? I think going back to what Maya has been explaining before about one person doing the whole thing and you have no clue of what actually went in. And I mean, there are even customers where they didn't even know that there was a breach happened until a while. And I think so that's critical, right? So if you look at it, identifying that, monitoring it, identifying it, and getting alerted in the appropriate time is most critical. So invest in that as the first priority, right? And then you can add all the good to haves on what's the response, what's the insurance after that, and the other things. But having the preventive controls and the appropriate monitoring in place would be the first thing to do.
Okay, thank you, Fani. So, collating on your observations and experience, what are some of the key critical steps that you guys feel organizations can take now to prevent cybersecurity threats?
Sure. Yeah. I think we have a good checklist of items that we have collected, but essentially to summarize those quick things that we collected, right? The first thing is making sure you have the right backups in place. And it's critical that we already mentioned before. It's important to test your backups, right? So many organizations, even though they have backups, they fail to validate the business recovery once a incident or a disaster happened, because you try to decrypt information, your decryption is successful, but your business is not back up with the decrypted data, so which is not helpful by any means, right? So it's critical to make sure you have backups, you test your backups, and you test your business disaster recovery plan also. So that's very critical, and businesses should be doing it on a regular basis. So that's primary thing that we would recommend to begin with. Would like to tell you, recommend organizations, especially from a migration from on-prem to cloud, to kind of invest in the centralized monitoring, alerting systems, and also have a IDP and a IDP system, intrusion detection, intrusion protection systems in place. So which will help you to kind of prevent and then also kind of alert you at the right times. So those are a couple of good things that we would highly recommend our customers.
So, I'm sorry, I'm echoing again. So, first and foremost, organizations need to educate their employees about information security, social engineering attacks, and the risk of clicking on unknown links and accessing websites they're not supposed to. They not only need to focus on educating their employees and end users, but they need to focus on educating their executives and decision makers so that they would better understand the importance of the key security controls and the importance of the information security team so that these items that Fani is recommending could be backed up by a budget and could be implemented at an organization. So again, there are technical controls, of which number one is maintaining that air-gapped offline backups of your data, multiple backups not connected to the network. You have to test your backups. You have to implement multi-factor authentication on your remote connections. Ensure your software patches are up to date as soon as they're released. But all of this is related. It goes back to governance, the organizational policies, and solid planning. The organizations have to be prepared. You have to have a solid incident response plan. And I don't want to repeat what Fanny have said, but we cannot stress enough how the importance of this. You have to have a solid incident response plan. You have to test your response plan. You have to have written backup restoration procedures and restore your data from backup frequently for testing purposes. And organizations need to realize that paying the ransom will lead to more attacks on your critical infrastructure and the private sector organizations. So it is really important to report the successful attacks to law enforcement agencies and the FBI. So in summary, invest in your security team so they can proactively secure the data and prevent ransomware and breaches. Maintain offline backups of your data, provide training, augment your security team, or hire a virtual CISA to help you identify the key areas that need improvement.
Thank you, Fani and Maya, for sharing your great insights and observations on ransomware and on enhancing your security posture. So I'd like to, open it up to the audience. Please submit any questions you have in the comments box. We do have one question that came to us before the event. So the question is, how do you decrypt data after a ransomware attack?
So it really depends on the type of ransomware, but as we mentioned earlier, the ransomware tactics are becoming more sophisticated. So the most important thing to keep in mind is, well, you attempt to remove the malware from the computer and restore it to your control, it really won't decrypt the files. And there was a survey recently done on about 1,200 organizations, and only 4% of them have successfully decrypted the files on their own. So we're not encouraging to pay the ransom, but what we are encouraging here is the only way to decrypt your data is to keep your offline backups. You have to be proactively prepared for such incidents.
Great, thank you, Maya. So another question we have is, as a security and privacy officer, how do I evaluate and find the right company to perform a comprehensive security system assessment that really helps us to identify those gaps?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think when as a security professional, right? So when the key things that you should always look for is, in the security world, there are a lot of tools, and what we see in the industry is that when we look at assessments done by our previous other vendors, right, we see that a lot of the assessments are only focused on running some automated tools on your network, running some automated tools on your web applications, things like that, and just kind of giving you that reports and saying that, hey, this is what you have, go figure it out, right? But if you look at the real world where those things are not being used to actually infiltrate a system versus something else, right? So it's very critical for an assessment organization to kind of spend good enough time to understand your independent or your actual system and infrastructure, and spend decent time in that, and kind of use a combination of tools, which is the basic stuff, and kind of do the advanced level after that, where you have manual penetration testing and things like that, that will actually really kind of help you to find more details, bug bounties, right, things like that, right? So those are the things that really help you to find the real blind spots, because most of the normal assessments, nah, not really. So that's what we kind of seen in the actual assessment. So I would highly recommend to kind of look at an assessment company on the way they kind of do the assessment, not just based on the tools and give you a report, but kind of how in depth they go into the system and try to identify gaps.
Thank you, Fani. And I have a two-part question. So there's a lot of controversy on whether to pay the ransom or not. So, should ransomware payments be banned by the governments?
Well, FBI and other law enforcement agencies advise not to pay, but in the end, it's a business decision. If you don't have a backup, you might have to pay. So the risk really has to be assessed by the organization, and this is in part of your incident response plan. It also depends whether the data was exfiltrated, in which case the privacy laws apply. You have to report the breach, which further leads to potential lawsuit. So whether you'll pay or not, it's really an individual business decision at this time. But you really should be prepared with your offline backups.
Thank you, Maya. Well, I think that's all the time we have today. If we didn't get to any of your questions that you've submitted in the chat, we'll definitely reach out directly with an answer. So we'd like to thank Fani Yalamancelli and Maya Bobic for joining us today to share their experiences. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us live today. We hope you found this session helpful and insightful, and look forward to connecting with you again soon. Be sure to check out SystemSoft and Security Compliance Associates for more information on security insights and best practices. Thank you.